The darkness of night had settled like a heavy blanket over our camp on the Aegean shore. Our ships, drawn up on the beach, stood in silhouettes against the pale shimmer of moonlight on the sand. Everywhere was silent except for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the monotonous song of distant crickets. Most soldiers had retreated to their tents or makeshift wooden huts, surrendering to the arms of sleep after the day's weariness. But I, as a Mycenaean soldier, kept watch without blinking despite this quiet night. Our fire had long since turned to embers, the red glow of coals casting a flickering light around us. With a shawl wrapped around my shoulders, I sat at my watchpost, gazing toward the distant walls of Troy. Stars sparkled like countless jewels in the sky, and I imagined the city of Troy sleeping behind that dark silhouette rising on the opposite shore. For 10 years we had spent our lives trying to overcome the enemy behind those stone walls. Our wooden-walled, temporary camp had become our home for years. Months had chased seasons, seasons had chased years. From spring's sweet breezes to summer's scorching heat, from autumn's coolness to winter's bone-chilling cold, we had tasted every climate on these foreign lands. As I kept watch with distant gazes into the quiet night, thoughts of my homeland crossed my mind. I thought of the family I had left behind in distant Mycenae. I brought before my eyes the olive tree I played under as a child in my home's garden, my mother's warm smile, and my little brother who had probably grown up by now. How young and excited I was when I set out for this war. Now I carry the weariness of a lifetime on my shoulders, homesickness in my heart. The years spent here, before Troy's walls, had changed us all. Most of our youth was consumed here on this shore, waiting around campfires. I ran my hand over the cloak I had spread on the ground, and my fingers became dusty with sand. Without realizing it, I was playing with the soil, taking a handful of sand and letting it flow through my fingers, as if it were native earth. A light breeze rose from the sea. As the salty air burned my throat, a familiar mixture of seaweed and smoke filled my nostrils. This scent was what we had breathed every night for 10 years, the smell of the Aegean Sea and campfires. It had now soaked into us like a memory, a trace that would follow us wherever we went. I lifted my head and looked up at the sky. The Milky Way stretched above us like a silver river. A shooting star streaked across the horizon. Perhaps it was a sign from one of the gods on Olympus, or perhaps just the dying life of a star. I felt in my heart that we were approaching the end of the war. After all these years, it seemed as if our fate would soon reach a decision. This feeling might have arisen from impatience, perhaps from weariness, but somewhere inside me, I felt as if I could see the light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. My watch companion returned from a distant patrol and walked toward me. When I heard the soft rustle his steps made in the sand, I startled and pulled myself from my thoughts. He crouched beside me silently, and for a while, we both looked toward the horizon without saying a word. The faint light of the fire was falling on the face of this friend, with whom I had fought shoulder to shoulder for years. I saw both weariness and a stubborn glimmer of hope in his eyes. Finally, he whispered, "When do you think this war will end?" His voice scattered in the wind. I shrugged my shoulders and whispered back, "The gods know. Perhaps soon, perhaps soon." We both responded to this uncertain consolation with a small smile. Our wishes were now the same, victory and return home. Slight movements could be seen in the dark corners of the camp, those turning in their sleep, wounded men moaning softly, or a few silhouettes preparing for guard duty changes. In just a few hours, dawn would break and a new day's uncertain struggles would begin. But for now, the night offered our weary bodies a brief refuge. In this calmest moment of the night, the lullaby-like repetition of distant wave sounds and the warmth of our fire's embers awakened a strange peace within me, as if, despite all the blood and tears, the world had stilled for a moment, allowing us to forget our pains and feel only the tranquility of existence. My eyelids began to grow heavy. I wouldn't want to fall asleep at my watch post, but my body secretly wanted to rest after all that weariness. I placed my sword and spear beside me, right under my hand. I needed to be alert for any possibility. Although Trojan night raids were rare, they weren't impossible. Yet a voice inside me whispered that this night would pass peacefully. Perhaps it was the calm before the storm. Years ago, when I first joined the war, I used to feel excitement mixed with fear at night. In the darkness, every shadow appeared to my eyes like an enemy soldier. But now I was almost indifferent. The fear of death had given way to a strange resignation. Our fate was in the hands of the gods, and I believed I had done everything I could. Wasn't it already a blessing to have survived so many battles alongside my comrades? Some of us had buried our closest friends here. Some had witnessed heroes we knew falling one by one. The shadow of our demigod warrior Achilles came to mind. Even that invincible fighter we thought unbeatable had ultimately given his life here. I remembered how the entire camp was plunged into darkness with the death of his closest friend Patroclus. The day Achilles laid Hector low in his fury, and then fell to his own fate. All these memories wandered like shadows on the shores of my mind. A light melancholy filled me, but within this melancholy was also respect. Not respect for the enemy, but for life's mortality. Both Achilles and Hector were now dead. Troy's great king Priam was also now quietly awaiting his fate behind his walls. In these twilight hours of the night, as all these thoughts slowly wandered through my mind, I noticed that my watch companion beside me had dozed off slightly. He had dropped his head to his chest and was breathing deeply in sleep. I looked at him and thought to myself, I hope you're seeing your homeland in your dreams, my friend. I turned my eyes back to the stars. There was still time before dawn. Perhaps I could move and try to sleep for a few hours soon. But just then, I heard a slight movement sound from the darkness. I listened carefully. The sound was coming from the camp center. Someone had awakened and seemed to be hurrying somewhere. In the moonlight, I saw two shadows advancing at a running pace over the sands. I immediately stood up, my hand on my sword's hilt, alert. The approaching figures were our own soldiers. They were clearly carrying news. This haste in the night was enough to make my heart beat rapidly. Perhaps the awaited moment, a time for action, had come. Suddenly, the weariness within me gave way to alert curiosity. I gently touched my watch companion's shoulder and woke him up. He rubbed his eyes and looked around in confusion. Something's happening, I whispered. There's movement toward the commander's tent. He immediately pulled himself together and grabbed his sword. From afar, silhouettes running with torches could be seen from the direction of Agamemnon's great tent. Before dawn broke, in the final moments of darkness, a horn sounded, the commander's call horn. With years of habit, everyone armed themselves within a few breaths, hastily grabbing their shields and helmets, and gathered. The surroundings were still in twilight. The embers of fires cast light on the pale faces wandering around, sleepy but excited gazes. Agamemnon's voice tore through the morning silence. Our king, the great leader of the Mycenaeans, stood in front of his tent with prominent heroes like Menelaus, Odysseus, and Diomedes around him, addressing us. Brave men of the Achaean army, Agamemnon bellowed. For 10 years we have endured in this accursed war. We have lost many comrades. Now the time for victory has come. The crowd responded with murmurs. The dull sound of fists striking shields could be heard everywhere. Agamemnon raised one hand, and the surroundings became quiet again. He continued, The gods have shown us a way. Clever Odysseus has a plan. Upon this, Odysseus stepped forward. His intelligent gaze and sharp facial features became prominent in the firelight. His voice was calmer than the other kings and commanders, but full of confidence. We could not take Troy by force, Odysseus began to speak, so we shall take it by cunning. This statement created a murmur throughout the camp. Everyone looked at each other and whispered. Odysseus raised his hand with a slight smile. Listen, friends, he said. We will build a wooden horse, a massive horse, in the shape of an animal the Trojans consider sacred. Our bravest warriors will hide inside this horse. The rest of us will make a false retreat and appear to abandon this shore with our ships. The weight of these words had deeply shaken us all. Confused gazes and whispers about the great wooden horse and the incredible ruse could be heard. Some muttered that this idea was madness, while others smiled with excitement. My heart was beating rapidly. Odysseus continued, The Trojans will think they have won victory. They will take the horse into the city, thinking it a votive offering to the goddess ... When night comes, those of us inside the horse will open the city gates. Our army waiting outside will return and conquer the city from within and without. There was a moment of deep silence. The audacity of the plan had enchanted us all. Then suddenly, a roar-like wave of approval rose. Soldiers raised their spears in the air and shouted. I found myself shouting with enthusiasm too. The pain and tension of 10 years seemed to lighten suddenly with this hopeful plan of cunning. The possibility of victory had finally taken concrete form. No time was wasted before taking action. At Agamemnon's command, carpenters, blacksmiths, and strong soldiers were called to duty. A warrior named Epeius, known for his skill, was assigned to oversee the construction of the horse. Odysseus and Diomedes were also at his side, detailing the plan. Suitable trees had already been identified in a nearby grove. I heard in whispers that these trees were from a dogwood grove dedicated to Apollo. Although I feared angering the god for a moment, a belief was spreading in the camp that Athena was leading this plan. Our cunning plan seemed like a reflection of Athena's wisdom, and perhaps her eye was on our side. As the sun rose, the first task asked of us was to go to that nearby sacred grove and cut down trees. The sounds of axes and saws filled the morning silence. I too took ropes and tools on my back and went to the grove with a group. I was a soldier of years, but I would work like a carpenter for the first time. There was a strange excitement within me. Carrying wood instead of weapons felt foreign but hopeful. When we reached the grove, I looked at the dogwood trees rising in Apollo's silent witness. Morning light filtering through the leaves gently swayed the branches. I thought to myself, Forgive us, Apollo. This is something we must do to end a war that has lasted for years. Then I began swinging the axe. Cutting wood was also like a separate war. Each blow shook my arm. The tree trunks stubbornly resisted. I began to sweat, but I struck without stopping with the strength hope gave me. Each fallen tree meant getting one step closer to our victory. Together with other comrades, we tied the thick trunks we had cut with ropes and dragged them to the camp. As the sun rose higher, the air warmed. Salty sweat drops streamed from my eyebrows and stung my eyes. I was out of breath, but when I looked around, I saw everyone working with the same determination. Some were sawing boards with saws. Others were making grooves with hammers and chisels. Epeius was explaining how to join the thick beams that would form the horse's skeleton. Pillars were being erected in some places. Wheels were being prepared in others. Yes, they had decided to make round wheels under the horse, so it would be easy to pull it across the sand toward the city. Odysseus passed by us for a moment. There was an expression of excitement on his face that I rarely saw. He smiled slightly and called out, Come on, friends. May Athena help us. Seeing his confident state made us forget our weariness. We lifted the great logs shoulder to shoulder and placed them where Epeius showed us. As wooden beams were fastened together with nails and ropes, a giant skeleton began to rise. By midday, when the sun was blazing overhead, the rough outline of the horse had already emerged. When I stepped back a bit to catch my breath, I looked at the rising wooden structure with unbelieving eyes. For the first time then, I felt this plan was materializing. A horse-shaped structure with a hollow belly ... Would the Trojans really be so overcome by their pride as to consider this truly a sacred gift? I tried to debate within myself whether this was possible. Then I thought of the Trojans' curiosity and intoxication with victory. If we withdrew after all these years, wouldn't leaving behind such a magnificent wooden statue seem like a symbol of their victory? Perhaps they really would take it. That was our hope too. We returned to camp and continued working. For the first time in days, we were engaged in such feverish work. Being occupied with an endeavor other than war was strangely morale-boosting. Our voices began to sound more cheerful. Some were half-jokingly teasing among themselves. Should we make this horse's ears a bit bigger? Or don't forget to add a tail? These small bits of humor were good for our tense nerves. A young soldier working right beside me joked while catching his breath, "When I return home, I won't want to hear the sound of a hammer again." I laughed and said, "As long as we return, son, we don't need to hear any sounds at all if you wish." As the sun moved west, the horse's body was completed. We left a hatch to enter the hollow belly of the giant statue. It could be climbed into with a wooden ladder. We were also nailing thinner boards to the outer surface to define the horse's form. Appius had undertaken the carving of the horse's head and neck. As he shaped the log with his chisel, he worked with an expression that spoke of his artistry. The rest of us were closing the sides of the body, strengthening the beams that fixed the four legs. As the air began to darken, torches became our light. We had covered incredible distance with one day's work, but the job wasn't finished. We didn't stop that night either, continuing in shifts. When some of our arms became too sore to lift, we rested a bit and got water and bread supplies, then returned to hammering nails and tightening ropes. When the stars reached the zenith, the wooden horse's shape stood there in all its majesty. It rose at the edge of our camp, like a giant shadow against the darkness. If the Trojans saw this silhouette among our fires from afar, what would they think? Perhaps they didn't understand what we were doing. With the second day's dawn, we set to work again. Now the horse's fine work remained, carving and smoothing the surface a bit, adding a few wooden strips resembling the horse's mane. News came later that an inscription would be carved on the horse. By Odysseus's command, we would carve a dedication sentence in large letters. This was perhaps the most important part of the ruse. The Greeks dedicate this thanksgiving offering to Athena for their return home. These words would reinforce the impression that the horse was a sacred gift. Odysseus and his companions carved the inscription themselves. I stood a bit away watching them. As the letters were engraved one by one into the wood, a strange feeling swelled within me. Addressing wise Athena with this false dedication, what if she takes offense? What if our ruse is discovered? Although I worried for a brief moment, then I saw Odysseus's self-assured posture. It was hard to believe this plan could be put forward without Athena's approval. Perhaps the goddess had put this idea directly into Odysseus's heart. Otherwise, it wasn't possible to believe that our fortune, which had not budged for 10 years, could turn. After the horse's final parts were also put in place, we stepped back and looked at our work with admiration. There it was, as tall as a building, a giant horse made of bright new wood. The sun, at noon zenith, sparkled over its body, and the resinous scent of freshly cut pine and dogwood trees spread through the air. I approached and ran my hand over one of the massive wheels. The wood was smooth and warm. Under my fingers, I felt the wood's grain. It was as if it had become a living being. It seemed almost impatient to carry the warriors who would settle inside it. The faces of the soldiers around me showed pride mixed with weariness. We had all put effort into this work, and now seeing its completed state was instilling a victory enthusiasm within us. At the same time, a slight shiver emerged within me. What would happen next contained great uncertainty. Would the plan succeed? Or would everything turn out wrong? Standing in the giant shadow of the wooden horse, I felt that my own fate was also tied to the fate of this horse. With the completion of the horse, the second phase of the plan would begin. The hiding of warriors inside this horse, and the false retreat of the rest of the army. When this was announced, many brave men came forward wanting to volunteer. Odysseus and Agamemnon, however, were carefully determining the team that would go inside. The bravest and most agile warriors would be chosen, those who could wait silently inside the horse and then attack like lightning. It was clear that Odysseus himself would lead this team. Menelaus was also eager to take revenge for 10 years. He would also be among those going inside. Diomedes, Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, and many other famous warrior names were mentioned. I never expected my name to be called, but suddenly, one of the officers read my name aloud. My heart nearly stopped. They had chosen me. For a moment, I stood there not knowing what to do. Those around me nudged my arms, whispering, "Go on, you're lucky. They chose you." I felt my feet carrying me forward. When I reached Odysseus, I noticed my knees were trembling, but I kept my head high. Odysseus touched my shoulder with a slight smile. "You've proven your courage, son. Come with us," he said in a low voice. At that moment, both incredible pride and indescribable fear swelled within me. I had been chosen. I would be part of this honorable but dangerous mission. When I looked back, I saw my watch companion, my friend's eyes following me. He hadn't been chosen. He nodded toward me and gave me a sincere smile in greeting. We looked at each other as if saying farewell in the blink of an eye, perhaps for the last time. I drove this thought from my mind. The day had turned to afternoon. At the commander's order, the entire army began preparing for the false withdrawal. Tents were packed and loaded onto ships. Heavy belongings that wouldn't be taken were thrown into fires. Our camp stretching along the shore began to be covered in smoke. Since I would enter the horse, I watched the empty skeleton of my own tent being surrendered to flames. Seeing that tent, which had sheltered me for years, catch fire and blacken awakened a bitter feeling within me. At that moment, I understood that either victory would be ours tonight, or we would never return to this shore. While my comrades rushed about, I made my final preparations. I removed the heavy parts of my armor. I decided to leave my bronze breastplate and shield on the ship. Inside the horse, I would need to be silent and agile. There was no room for metal's noise. I decided to wear only light leather armor, take my sword at my waist, a short spear and dagger with me. On my head, instead of a helmet, would remain a simple cap. Even the slightest sound the bronze helmet made could echo inside. At the same time, I was praying inwardly. To Zeus, to Athena, to Poseidon, whoever would listen. Please, I was saying, let this ruse succeed. Don't let our efforts be in vain. I saw that the other selected soldiers around me were also making similar preparations. Menelaus had armed himself, but left his great shield behind to move agilely. I could read the anger and impatience of years on his face. Odysseus, with calm determination, was reviewing everyone, whispering final instructions. Meanwhile, one from the army would voluntarily remain behind. A young soldier named Sinon had undertaken the role of surrendering to the Trojans at the risk of his life. He was an important part of the plan. He would convince the Trojans that the Greeks had left, tell them a story, and persuade them that this wooden horse was an offering dedicated to the goddess Athena. One couldn't help but admire his courage. I thought to myself, if he's caught and killed, no one will see, yet he'll still do it. This sacrifice strengthened my belief within me that the plan would succeed. As the sun approached the horizon, only we, a handful of warriors who had entered the horse, remained on the shore without boarding the ships. The great army had completed its final preparations and crowded onto the ships. The wind was gently swelling the sails on the shore. Agamemnon and other commanders also took their places on the ships. I felt a strange pang in my heart at that moment. Our army was really leaving, abandoning us here. Of course, it was a ruse to return at night, but I still felt as if I had been left to fate's hands. We gathered by the horse. Appius opened the hidden hatch he had mounted on the wooden body. Inside was dim and narrow, but there was enough space for all those men to fit. Odysseus began letting us in one by one, reading our names in order. First he climbed himself, then Diomedes, Menelaus, and the others. When my turn came, my heart was beating wildly. I gripped the wooden ladder and climbed up with my trembling legs. I stepped into a dark void. Inside smelled of resin and freshly carved wood. I tried to make out my surroundings. It was pitch black, except for faint light filtering through a few holes. I heard Odysseus's whisper, "Move forward, make room." Among crawling footsteps and armor rustles, everyone entering lined up knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder. I also squeezed into a suitable corner. Even if my neighbor wasn't a friend, I recognized a familiar face on my right. Neoptolemus Achilles' young son had taken his spear in his lap and was waiting silently with his eyes closed. On my left was another Achaean soldier, whose face I couldn't quite make out. From his breathing, I could tell he was as excited as I was. Once everyone was settled, after Appius made sure no one remained outside, he slowly closed the hatch over us. In the belly of the wooden horse, we were buried in absolute darkness. Sounds from outside could be heard faintly. The winds howling, waves hitting the shore in the distance. And then a stronger sound, sailors' commands and the noise of sails. Our ships were departing. I began counting to myself. The first ship, the second ship ... I could hear wave sounds and oars cutting through water. Then horn sounds and war cries mixed. I understood that our army was shouting for the final show, announcing their departure to the Trojans. Soon the thundering footsteps and battle cries faded away, giving way to growing silence. I waited in the darkness, holding my breath. When a soldier beside me let out a slight sigh, we heard Odysseus's very quiet silence, warning. Everyone had become stone still, because now only we and the enemy unaware of the giant wooden horse remained on the shore. We couldn't see what was happening outside, but I felt in my heart, the Trojans must be looking at our camp from atop the walls. I imagined they were experiencing tremendous chaos and waves of joy. For the first time in 10 years, the beach was completely empty. Achaean ships were disappearing on the horizon. Only a burned and destroyed camp and a giant wooden horse remained. Everyone inside us was alert, listening for the slightest sound from outside. For a while, perhaps equivalent to hours in length, we heard nothing. My legs were already starting to go numb. We couldn't move much in the narrow space. I could smell the thickening air inside the wood, the scent of people's sweat and anxiety. My own heartbeat was roaring in my ears. I began praying again, inwardly. Athena, hide us. Apollo, turn your eyes elsewhere. Poseidon, protect our brothers at sea. Just when the hopeless wait seemed to drag on forever, we began to hear muffled human voices from outside. The Trojans must have approached. I heard someone shouting loudly, probably giving orders. Then noises, confused cries, as if a numerically large group was examining the horse. A spear tip appeared on the wooden side with a great bang, pushed a few centimeters toward us, and withdrawn. We all flinched. The soldier beside me reflexively half drew his sword. I touched his arm and stopped him. I gritted my teeth and waited without saying a word. There were clearly heated discussions outside. Some must have been talking about tearing apart and burning the horse. Disagreement could be sensed from the tone of voices. Just then another voice was heard, a man speaking with a calmer and more persuasive manner. This must be Sinon. Yes, he needed to come into play at exactly this moment of the plan. We couldn't make out his voice clearly, but he was clearly telling a long story. Laughter and surprised exclamations rose from the crowd. He was probably making up false stories and trying to gain their trust. We inside were straining to understand, clinging to every word fragment, but the outcome was uncertain. As time passed, the noise outside suggested a decision had been reached. Suddenly, enthusiastic cheering broke out. Then shaking began. The Trojans were moving the horse. The ground beneath us swayed. We leaned to one side slightly, then straightened again. "Get ready," Odysseus whispered in the darkness. "It's beginning." With the pulling force we felt in our stomachs, the horse began moving forward slowly. The Trojans were probably pulling it with ropes. The wheels turned with squeaking in the sand. We could hear these sounds from inside. Every moment my heart felt like it would stop. If something went wrong now and they discovered our ruse, we would be burned alive or speared in this wooden cage. I pushed this thought from my mind and focused on my mission, to be patient and stay quiet until the right moment came. The horse's movement slowed and stopped, then shook again. I think they were pulling it uphill through the gate in the walls. At one point, the horse swayed harshly. Inside, one or two people lost their balance and leaned against the wooden wall. Right beside me, I heard Neoptolemus's rattling breath. He must have hit his knee somewhere. No one complained. We all endured the shaking by gritting our teeth. Finally, I felt we had entered a shaded area. From the sounds I understood we were now inside the walls, in the heart of Troy. The sound of ropes loosening and people's joyful cries could be heard. There inside, they brought the horse. I wanted to shout inwardly, but we controlled ourselves. They placed the horse in the center of the city, perhaps near Athena's temple. Outside, thousands of footsteps, cheerful shouts, songs began to rise. The Trojans were beginning victory celebrations. As the sun set, we inside the wooden horse, soaked with sweat and tension, listened to the sounds of celebration outside. They must have been singing together, offering sacrifices. Even the melodies of lyres and flutes came from outside occasionally. So they believed, I thought. They think we're gone. The soldier beside me whispered softly, "This uproar will last until morning, ... He was trying to suppress the excitement in his voice. I also brought my mouth close to his ear and whispered, "Be patient, friend. When the time comes, Odysseus will give the signal." He nodded and fell silent again. Outside, night was falling, and the Trojans' festivities were reaching a drunken enthusiasm. Everyone inside us became more impatient hearing these sounds, but also worried. What if one of them got curious and tried to look inside the horse? What if Cassandra's prophecy was heard? We had heard she warned them. We hoped they didn't believe her. At one point, crazy laughter and commotion rose. We heard a dull crash. We didn't understand what happened then, but I would learn later. A priest of Troy, Laocoon, had warned about the horse, and at that very moment was strangled by serpents coming from the sea. We inside only heard the brief panic of the people outside, and then the festivities continuing with enthusiasm. This was perhaps a sign from the gods to the Trojans. Take the horse into the city. And that's what they did. Time flowed by. My legs were numb, writhing in pain. I could feel those beside me struggling not to move. Finally, toward midnight, the crowd's noise outside began to decrease. The festive sounds turned to occasional drunken shouts. The Trojans must have been withdrawing, one by one, to their homes, or to the sleep they had fallen into. Just then, there was a slight clicking in the horse's body near us. I heard Odysseus whisper decisively in the darkness. Now, my heart felt like it would leap from its place. The awaited moment had come. I felt for my sword's hilt with my hands. Despite my sweaty palms, I gripped it tightly. In the darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, Hippeus gently pushed the hatch's latch from inside. With a small thud, the wooden hatch cracked open and cool night air filtered inside. Praying that the Trojans wouldn't hear us, we straightened up one by one from our places. Through the small opening Hippeus had cracked, Odysseus stuck his head out and scanned the surroundings. Then with an agile movement, he slipped outside. One by one we began following him down. When my turn came, I carefully stepped outside from the wooden edge into the night. Moonlight was washing Troy's streets with pale brightness. For a moment, my breath caught. I was now inside these walls I had looked at from outside for 10 years. Around us stretched a wide square decorated with tall columned buildings, statues, and temples. This was probably the courtyard of Athena's temple. A little further I seemed to make out the goddess's statue. No one could be seen around the square. The Trojans must have fallen into deep sleep after the feast and festivities. I saw a few overturned wine jars and half-burned torches on the ground. Occasional unconscious bodies lying drunk could be made out among the shadows. My heart was beating with both fear and victory enthusiasm. I quietly drew my sword from its sheath. The steel piece gleamed in the moonlight. Odysseus ordered us to split into groups with hand signals. According to our plan, one group would head to the wall gates and open the locks. One group would light fires to signal our distant ships. The rest would advance toward the palace and main points to seize strategic locations. I was in the group going to the gate with Menelaus and several soldiers. We began running with quick and silent steps through the stone-paved streets. Diomedes led the way, sword in hand. When we turned a narrow corner, we encountered an unexpected obstacle. 2 Trojan soldiers, probably night patrol, were leaning against the wall, slightly dozing. It was only a matter of moments before they noticed us. Diomedes didn't even hesitate. He approached them like a shadow and plunged his sword into both their chests simultaneously. The men collapsed without even a moan. Witnessing this silent death scene made me shudder, but we couldn't stop. Menelaus hoarsely whispered, "Forward." We stepped over the bodies and continued. When we reached the wall gate, we saw there were guards dozing on both sides of the gate. Their number was about 3 or 4. We dealt with them too in a quick raid. One woke up and tried to raise his sword, but I blocked his blow with my shield, instead of the large shield I didn't bring, with a small wooden board, and struck his neck with my sword. The man fell with a crash. I had been holding my breath. Now I realized I was taking a deep breath. This wasn't perhaps the first person I had killed among those I had known as enemies for years, but this moment was different. We were in the very heart of Troy, and there was no turning back. We lifted the gate bars and opened the great wooden wings. Looking out into the dark plain, I saw a movement in the distance, like an army in shadows approaching from Tenedos' direction. Sinon must have lit the signal flare as promised. We also climbed the walls and lit the torches we had prepared and waved them toward the darkness. This was the gates are open. Come. Message to the Achaean army that had disembarked from ships and returned. Very soon, the silhouettes of our own soldiers appeared outside the gate. Hundreds of men filled with revenge fire, encouraging each other with slogans, swords, spears, and torches in their hands, rushed inside. I picked out Agamemnon's armor at the front of the crowd. Our king was entering the city with victory cries. Behind him, countless Achaean soldiers began pouring into the walls in waves. Now Troy's end had come. The city was coming under our control, from inside and outside. Trojans waking up one by one in the streets began fleeing in panic. House doors were slamming with fear. Women's screams were tearing through the night. Our soldiers, according to strategy, first spread to important buildings and open areas, then began heading to random houses to see if there was any resistance. I decided to advance toward the castle, the palace, alongside Menelaus. I was aware there was only one thing on his mind: Helen. The revenge fire of years was blazing in his eyes. On the way, several guards dared to confront us. We defeated them one by one. When we reached the palace courtyard, the scene had turned into complete hell. Great chaos reigned. Sword clashes echoed among the marble columns. The light of flames danced on the walls. At this point, one separated from Menelaus, as he had rushed inside with fury, while I was drawn into the surrounding struggle. In a dark corridor, I came face to face with a Trojan soldier. He was a young man, standing before me with a spear in his hand, frightened. Perhaps he was fighting for the first time. He hesitated for a moment. This brief moment was his end. My comrade, who couldn't forgive hesitation, leaped from beside me and struck down the young man with his sword. As the boy collapsed to the ground, the life in his eyes was extinguished. Though my heart ached, we had to continue. Chaos reigned in Troy's streets. The now fully awakened people were trying to resist with both terror and anger, but they had no leaders. I saw smoke rising from inside King Priam's palace. I would learn later that Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, had killed the old king before Zeus's altar. The survivors of Priam's lineage were trying to flee, some taking refuge in temples. But neither Zeus nor Apollo was saving the Trojans that night. As I passed in front of one of the temples, a terrible scream reached my ears. I dared to take a brief look. A small group of our soldiers was dragging a young woman who had taken refuge in Athena's temple. The girl's screams tore at my heart. I recognized her. She must be Cassandra, daughter of King Priam, the prophetess. Something inside me seemed to break. Enough already, I whispered to myself. Victory is ours. Finish this business. But what was happening was happening. It was impossible to stop. When I emerged again into the main square, fires were burning vigorously around me, turning night into day. Troy's famous tall towers were crackling toward the sky as if crying out in flames. The magnificent city I had once admired from the opposite shore was now suffocating in flames and smoke. Achaean soldiers were shouting with the wild enthusiasm of having completed their mission, some rushing here and there in pursuit of loot. But I stood there, in the middle of the square, and looked around. My ears were ringing, perhaps from weariness, perhaps from the horror of what I heard. My eye caught the overturned wooden horse in a corner. The Trojans must have opened the horse's belly during their celebrations and found it empty. Perhaps they had gone mad with rage and pulled it down with ropes. Now that magnificent wooden horse lay on its side, its wooden body glowing red in the firelight. I stared at our own creation. On one hand, it was a monument to the cunning that brought us victory. On the other, it seemed like a symbol of all this destruction. The sky was beginning to lighten slightly in the east. Dawn was breaking after a long and bloody night. The wind changed direction and began blowing from the sea, throwing the sharp smell of burned wood ash into my face. This smell was infused with the bitter mixture of victory and defeat. Just then, in that smoke and chaos, a silhouette ran toward me. I reflexively raised the sword in my hand, but then I realized he was a Greek soldier. In the light of a burning house, I saw his face. This was my dear friend, the one I chatted with during watches, shared bread with. I ran to him with the joy I felt that he was alive. We embraced each other's armor, shoulders. Tears were sparkling in his eyes, and in mine, ... We did it. We whispered to each other. At that moment, in the midst of all that destruction, a warm happiness sprouted within me. We were alive, and this nightmare was over. As the sun rose from the horizon as a blood-red circle, it painted the sky with the black smoke rising over Troy. Victory was ours, but there was a strange emptiness within me. Revenge had been taken, honor perhaps restored, but countless lives from both sides had fallen to the ground. With a slight ache in my heart, I wanted to leave these thoughts to the wind. The army began to gather. By Agamemnon's order, loot and prisoners would be carried to the ships. Some of my comrades were joyfully carrying golden cups and embroidered fabrics. Others were collecting the wounded. But I stepped away from all this bustle for a moment. I slowly climbed to a tower of the walls and surveyed the city one last time from above. The wind was blowing, caressing my hair and face. Below, smoke rising from burning houses' roofs was drifting in the morning sky like gray clouds. Beyond, the plain where we had fought for 10 years was spread out. Now that place was also silent. Further still, the navy blue sea stretched. Our ships anchored on the shore seemed to be swaying impatiently among the waves. Our journey home was waiting for us. I took a deep breath. Salty sea air and the smell of burned wood. I knew I would never forget this smell in my lifetime. This smell carried the memory of what we had lost and what we had gained. I closed my eyes and turned my face toward the rising sun. Its warm rays caressed my dirty, soot-stained face. I heard my friend calling from below. "Come on, get ready. We're going home." Home. This word awakened a sweet longing within me. For the first time in years, I truly believed I could return home. I smiled and waved to him, then began descending from the walls. That day preparations continued until noon. Loot was distributed. Prisoners were boarded onto ships. I didn't want much. Just a small bronze sword to take to my father, and an embroidered shawl as a gift for my brother. Our commanders were handling the rest anyway. As the sun tilted west, our army boarded ships from Troy's shores for the last time. When I boarded my ship, I turned and looked back at Troy's walls, once thought invincible. Now between the ruined walls, flames were smoking, columns lay fallen and razed. I said a brief prayer inwardly. May souls find peace. May this war never return. We filled our sails with the evening breeze. I sat in my place on deck. As oars dipped in and out of water, our ship began moving slowly forward. As we moved away from shore, the sky was painted in orange and pink colors. Seagull sounds could be heard, as if life continued in nature, as if nothing had happened. At that moment, I understood that my life too would continue. Even if this war took a part of us, we would continue living with the rest. As our ship sailed toward night with gentle swaying, the first stars appeared in the sky. Some of my comrades had already fallen asleep from weariness. I too leaned my back against the ship's deck, lifted my head, and looked at the familiar star clusters. For 10 years I had watched these stars on Troy's shore. Now they would be our guide again on the journey home. The coolness of night seemed to lift the weariness from my shoulders. I closed my eyes. The gentle lapping of waves against the boat sounded like a lullaby to my ears. Somewhere in the distance, a lute tinkled. Perhaps one of our comrades was humming a victory song. But that sound too mixed into a sweet sleep breeze and faded away. An indescribable feeling of peace rose within me. This was the peace of having done our duty, of having survived. My thoughts slowly scattered. Images of my homeland appeared in my mind. Mycenae's golden wheat fields, my family waiting for me at my home's threshold, the moment we would be welcomed with tears of joy at the harbor. As I dreamed of these things, a smile appeared at the corners of my lips. As our ship swayed sweetly in the open sea, the stars had taken their places overhead. Night's darkness was now like a friendly blanket over us, not an enemy. My eyelashes grew heavy, my breathing deepened. For the first time in 10 years, my heart was truly at peace. I opened my eyes one last time and looked at the brightest star in the sky. Perhaps this was Aphrodite's star, or Zeus's gaze. Whatever or whoever it was, I thanked them inwardly. Then I slowly closed my eyes. Wave sounds, the ship's wooden creaking, and light wind howling surrounded me. I surrendered myself to the arms of these sounds. They were as soothing as my mother's lullaby voice. As a soldier with a weary body and peaceful soul, I finally surrendered to sleep. Troy's dark nights were left behind. Now before me stretched a peaceful sleep and a future dawning in my dreams.